British Columbia Institute of Technology acknowledges that our campuses are located on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish nations of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh.
From the Broadcast Center at BCIT's Burnaby Campus, this is All Talk Radio. You're listening to 1680 The Crow.
Hello and good morning. I'm Grace McLeod with your 10 a.m. news. To begin our news for today, it is day 2 without buses in BC due to the strike action. BC Labour's ministers is urging both sides in the ongoing transit dispute to get back to the negotiation table. Harry Baines, a Canadian minister, says his department is seriously considering appointing a special mediator in the case. The minister says both sides understand the responsibility they have to the public to get buses driving again. He says a special mediator recommendations to solve the dispute could be made public. Also in BC, police in the west central British Columbia has confirmed 7 people were aboard a heli-skiing helicopter that crashed Monday afternoon, leaving 3 dead and 4 badly injured. Terrace RCMP says the crash happened about 50 kilometers northwest of the city, and the aircraft was one of 3 helicopters in a backcountry skiing trip. Police say that the other helicopters lost contact with the aircraft before they spotted the crash site. Northern Escape Heli Skiing, based in Terrace, said in the news release Monday that 3 people died when one of its helicopters crashed, but didn't say how many others were aboard. Terrace RCMP says the 4 injured people are in hospital in serious condition. Police say the Coroner's Service, the Transportation Safety Board, and Workplace BC are also involved, and investigators will be flown to the remote site to investigate the crash. Elsewhere in Canada, the University of Regina says 50 nursing students were investigated for possible cheating on final exams in December. It says the investigation confirmed there are some cases of academic misconduct, but the other probes resulted in insufficient evidence. The university says not all the investigations are complete, and notes that the students found in violation of academic misconduct provisions have the right to appeal the decision within 30 days to the Council Discipline Committee. Down in the U.S., the state of Alabama, unless stopped by the courts, plans to carry out a controversial execution this week. Reporter Rita Foley with the Associated Press has more.
It's the first time any state has tried this method of execution. On Thursday, the state of Alabama plans to execute Kenneth Eugene Smith by strapping him to a gurney and using a gas mask to replace breathable air with nitrogen, depriving him of oxygen. The Alabama Attorney General's office calls it the most painless and humane method of execution known to man. But some doctors and critics disagree. Dr. Jeffrey Keller, president of the American College of Correctional Physicians, calls it experimental, saying the plan is to eliminate all the oxygen from the air he's breathing, and that, he says, would be little different than putting a plastic bag over somebody's head. Kenneth Eugene Smith was convicted in a murder-for-hire plot in 1988. I'm Rita Foley.
Further updates from the Gaza war, there are reports that Egypt and Qatar are developing a multi-stage proposal to try and bridge gaps in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Tom Rivers with ABC has more on the story.
Without going into detail and acknowledging the situation remains fluid, Qatar Foreign Ministry spokesman Majid Al-Ansari says,
"We are always hopeful, but not necessarily optimistic. We see that the negotiations are still taking place. They haven't stopped. Both sides are talking. They are engaging in serious discussions, and we are hopeful that that would lead to something."
Meanwhile, a senior Egyptian official says Israel has proposed a 2-month ceasefire, which the hostages would be freed in exchange for imprisoned Palestinians. Tom Rivers, ABC News at the Foreign Desk.
And in entertainment news, some history was made with the morning's Oscars nomination. Jason Nathanson with ABC explains why.
It was a historic morning for Killers of the Flower Moon star Lily Gladstone.
Evil surrounds my heart.
She scored an Oscar nomination for Best Actress, not only the first Native American woman ever nominated in that category, she's the first Native American person ever nominated for any acting Oscar. Also making history, Gladstone's director Martin Scorsese nominated for Best Director. At 81 years old, he's the oldest ever nominee in that category. And John Williams' nomination for Best Score for Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny makes him the oldest nominee ever at 91. Jason Nathanson, ABC News.
And in weather news today, it is currently 7 degrees and raining outside. However, this won't remain for long, seeing as though the sun and some cloud are meant to peek out later this morning. Those were your 10 a.m. news updates. I'm Grace McLeod with BCIT The Crow. Stay tuned for more updates and news at noon.
Stay tuned for more on BCIT's 1680 The Crow. This is 1680 The Crow, and you're listening to our feature presentation.
Be advised that the content of this podcast involves sensitive topics such as drug use and addiction. Listener discretion is advised.
In Canada, psilocybin is an illegal substance which has limited medical exemptions that can result in an improved sale. However, the legalization of marijuana has sparked an increased campaign to use a similar framework to legalize magic mushrooms. In this episode, we speak to 3 experts with lots of experience in the psychological, medical, and legal aspects of psilocybin.
Zach Walsh,
a professor at UBC and a clinical psychologist. A lawyer and retired criminology professor from Simon Fraser University. And
Dr. Pamela Crisco,
a medical doctor whose expertise is chronic pain and psychedelic-assisted therapies.
Listen, I'm not on drugs. I'm
Isabella Calisi.
And I'm Zach Arabko.
And today's drug history lesson is on psilocybin, or magic mushrooms. Psilocybin is a psychedelic drug that's found in more than 200 species of fungi all around the world. When ingested, its effects include euphoria, visual and mental hallucinations, a distorted sense of time, and perceived spiritual experiences. In 1968, the Canadian government banned the use and possession of psilocybin under 2 distinct laws, the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act and the Food and Drugs Act. Both of these made the drug illegal in both its physical form as a mushroom as well as its chemical form as pure psilocybin. These laws came into effect during the beginning of Richard Nixon's War on Drugs in the United States. The war on drugs, or the war on certain drugs, as some experts put it, is a fight against substances in the United States that didn't originate from Western Europe, such as opium, cannabis, and cocaine. Meanwhile, drugs like alcohol and tobacco have not faced prohibition since the 1920s. For drug researchers, lawyers, and doctors, the war on drugs is a topic that has been long debated, discussed, and researched. While those consuming these drugs were impacted, these bans also put a halt to research.
Nixon's war on drugs in the 70s, and no medical evidence was presented at that time. No scientific evidence was presented at that time. They weren't interested. They were interested in criminalizing behaviors, take people out of the political sphere. And so we find ourselves in a position where we're asking this question, should these be legal, when we basically had 40 years of prohibition for no reason?
In the legal landscape, Boyd has a different perspective to the same question.
When we say war on drugs, I think we have to be quite clear. It's a war on certain drugs. Whether it's a war is something that reasonable people can disagree on, but it's certainly the case that some drugs have been criminalized going back to 1908, and cannabis was criminalized from 1923 until 2018, when it became regulated in a manner not that different from alcohol and tobacco. There are some key differences in how each of those drugs are regulated, but it's now a legally regulated drug as opposed to a criminally prohibited drug.
End the war on drugs. It's a stupid, racist catastrophe, and let people have their mushrooms. It's been sort of one of the major engines of my life's work has been trying to counter the war on drugs. So very much anti-war on drugs. I mean, look, we legalized cannabis. That was supposed to be the worst one forever, right? Like that was the one that the gateway and all that terrible stuff. And we legalized cannabis, and what's happened? We've seen seniors using more cannabis, and that's it. Turns out everyone who wanted weed was getting weed anyway, which is disappointing to the cannabis industry. There's like, where's our billions and billions of dollars? No, it turns out everyone still grows their own weed, buys it from their friends, but people aren't getting arrested. That's huge. It's huge not only for the people that would be arrested but aren't, but for the rest of us who get to live in a freer, more fair society, and also who are allowed to choose how we alter our consciousness so that we're not, funneled into this alcohol nightmare.
Dr. Zach Walsh believes that the stigmatization of psilocybin stems from the geographical origin of the drug.
The Western European drugs are welcomed, and drugs from other regions, those are dangerous. So cannabis coming from India, the old drugs from Turtle Island before colonial times, dangerous, too dangerous. The reason things like mushrooms were banned was originally part of the Inquisition of the Americas. So they're directly tied to the suppression of indigenous practices and culture. There's no justification for it other than just sheer violence, racism, social control. And then they put a thin veneer of public health on top of it.
As Walsh puts it, this thin veneer of public health has been a questionable one for some time. Dr. Crisco also sees advantages to this research and the potential expanded use of these drugs.
In Canada right now, we have medical assistance in dying that people can apply for and get very quickly in under an hour. It takes me over 8 hours to apply to the government of Canada to get an exemption for somebody to have a psilocybin session if they're at end of life. So I think that one is a yes, and it's a no-brainer. If you have the right to die, like to access medical assistance in dying, then you should surely have absolutely the right to have psilocybin. I think anybody that gets a palliative care diagnosis should automatically qualify for psilocybin-assisted therapy if they wish.
As progress has been made over the years on people's opinions on drugs, so has research into the medical benefits. Both Dr. Walsh and Dr. Crisco have found evidence that psilocybin helps treat patients with both mental and physical ailments. However, along with doctor diagnosis and end-of-life therapy prescriptions, psilocybin is also used recreationally. In Vancouver, there are multiple mushroom dispensaries around, many of which can be found on Google Maps, and have accompanying websites. The shops serve anyone over the age of 19 and advocate for a safe supply for everyone.
I mean, Dana Larson, for example, has, set up these shops that were raided.
There's been a raid in Vancouver.
The raid that Crisco and Boyd were referring to was at the trio of mushroom dispensaries that Larson owns in Vancouver. A statement on the store's door reads, "On November 1st, the VPD raided all 3 of our locations. They seized all of our mushrooms, LSD, DMT, coca leaf, and money. We are restocking and will be fully open on November 3rd. This raid is shocking and unexpected. The VPD had previously stated they did not plan on raiding shops like ours. We have a hearing at City Hall on December 6th to decide the future of our business license. We expect the police to let the elected officials make their decisions first, before launching raids." In a statement from the Vancouver Police Department, Sergeant Steve Addison said the following: "We have been clear that anyone who breaks the law by illegally trafficking controlled drugs and substances could be arrested and charged with a criminal offense. This includes people who traffic drugs for profit from unlicensed and illegal retail businesses." After learning about the raid, Zach and I decided that we wanted to visit one of the stores. Neither Zach nor I have ever used mushrooms, so in order to gain a better understanding, we ventured out with someone who has experience with microdosing. He asked that we not use his real name for this podcast because of the legally tenuous nature of this particular drug. As a result, we have given him the pseudonym Greg. We're here with an avid shroom user. Would you describe yourself?
I'd say average. I prefer microdoses for sure. Yeah, so I microdose. So somewhere anywhere between like a quarter to a half of a full dose-ish, just recreationally. It's if you do any research on it, it actually has supposedly a lot of benefits. I think I tend to agree for sure. Yeah, I've only gone to a in-person store once, and that was back in Ontario. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing the stores here.
What got you into using shrooms and such?
Oh, just friends who were into it. This guy did a tab of LSD. That seemed a little bit too intense for me. I did some shrooms with him afterwards. That was still pretty intense. Full doses are a lot. I don't think they're my vibe, that's for sure. But microdosing, honestly, you could sort of if it's like a bigger microdose, you could say it's like a weed high without a lot of the brain fog, I would say, almost. Yeah, I generally prefer it, for sure. And then the smaller microdose, you almost can't even feel. Like a 100 milligrams to 150 milligrams, I can do that and then go start a day of work and honestly do a great job, yeah. I feel better during the day, so...
The mushroom dispensary felt very calm and clean. It was compact and had space for about 5 customers. The menus are on the back wall behind the counter. They were printed out onto standard printer paper in bright pink Comic Sans. Beyond their supply of drugs, they also sell drug parody-themed books written by Dana Larson. Green Buds and Hash and Harry Pothead were just 2 examples. The employees were friendly, giving Greg recommendations on products and selling him on trying a microdose in the form of a chocolate bar. Once Greg selected his items for purchase, he had to fill out a form and show some photo ID confirming his age. He received a membership card in case he wanted to make any future purchases at the store. There were a number of free informational pamphlets on the medical benefits of the drug, as well as information about the other drugs that were available. The employees we spoke to encouraged us to read through them if we were interested in trying anything. The staff at the store declined to be interviewed, but confirmed off the record that people of all walks of life came into the shop, from young to old, new users to regulars. We asked Greg, after we went to the mushroom dispensary, what his final thoughts were after our visit.
That place was definitely not the place I was expecting to get a membership card from. That was probably the most legal gray zone area place we've been to today. But it's cool to know that they're all collecting data to try and be on the legal side, because realistically, if they're not collecting data, they're just operating like without names or anything. They don't have much of a say in their legality. So it's good to know they're all trying.
What have you learned today about like Vancouver shops versus like the one that you've tried in Ottawa? And would you say it's similar to any other types of shops you've been to?
I would say the biggest difference is that the shops here are fighting a much bigger fight. From what they've said, they're working with societies of nurses and a lot of different stuff to actually gather medical data on shrooms to help their fight with legalization. And that's just pretty huge. Feels like it makes me want to support them.
Our adventure spawned a lot of talk about legalization. We wanted to ask those we encountered in the mushroom dispensary about their opinions on legalization. There was positivity and hope about it. The people we spoke to believe that psilocybin will go the same route as cannabis did and soon become legalized. Going back to Dr. Walsh, he admitted there's still a lot to figure out.
So how do we balance the risks of people taking mushrooms and causing a harm or a nuisance to themselves and to society while still maintaining the cognitive liberty? And I guess
Walsh's use of the word liberty sparked a thought. Could there be a potential challenge through the courts? We asked our experts with legal and criminal backgrounds for their thoughts on psilocybin legalization, and if cannabis has laid down any potential groundwork for psilocybin's future.
We have a Section 7 challenge to cannabis. Malmo Levine, I think, was the case. There was a strong minority, I think it was a 6-3 decision of the Supreme Court of Canada in favor of continuing with criminalization. But 3 justices of the Supreme Court took the position that criminalization of possession should end. There are some similarities, but I mean, there's some differences with the two drugs, but there's certainly similarities. With cannabis, there's recreation and medicine, both angles to it. But I would argue for most people, it's recreation. But now we're seeing, with end of life situations that people have an interest in using psilocybin to help cope. Yeah, I think there is a similarity, to be sure, between the approach that we have developed with cannabis and now what we're seeing with psilocybin. But again, there are some key differences between those two drugs.
Absolutely. Yeah, no. I mean, my first degree is criminology. If we put all the experts in the decision-making places, this would move easily in government. Like if you took all of us doctors that have been working in this and know the science and research it, and we could make the decisions, this would happen. We'd have thoughtful policy. We'd have great training programs. We would have great therapy centers. It would be brilliant. Our system's not like that.
We want to ask Dr. Crisco her thoughts on how the medical field's opinions have changed towards psilocybin in the aftermath of marijuana legalization, given her expertise in chronic pain and psychedelic-assisted therapies.
It's really moved a lot. Like there's still a lot of people out there that are completely naive and have no idea and are still indoctrinated by the war on drugs. I remember this point going, where will we be in 5 years? And it accelerated beyond that. It's everywhere in popular media. Like I don't watch a lot of television or movies, but when I do, there's almost always a reference to psychedelics in the positive, not in the negative.
During our conversation with Dr. Welsh, he presented an analogy comparing the ability to ski on an unrecognized hill in Kelowna to eating a random mushroom you find on the ground. It's a comparison that stuck with us. He also tied this idea back to the potential interference of laws on life and liberty.
I live on the side of a mountain here in Kelowna, and I can see the big white ski hill. And I know my neighbors have skis, but they don't just ski off the side of the mountain. I imagine there would be some bylaw against it, but it's not that we've criminalized skiing. We've made a really nice place where people can go ski, and then they just go there because it's safer and better in all ways than skiing off the side of the mountain. And so I think psilocybin could be like that. If we create pathways for optimal psilocybin experience, people will use it safely. Really, if we think about what do we want to do with different drug regulations, we want to minimize the risks and accentuate the benefits. Baseline, there is a benefit of just liberty. Just here's a mushroom that grows on the ground. I can put it in my mouth if I want.
Psilocybin legalization continues to be a hot topic of discussion. Research for mental health benefits are all coming out with positive results, and drug activists believe it will follow the same pathway as cannabis. All we can do in the meantime is sit back and see what the courts and politicians decide. Thank you to our listeners for joining us, and thank you to our interviewees, Dr. Zach Walsh, Dr. Pamela Crisco, and Neil Boyd, for speaking with us and entertaining our questions. And a special thank you to Greg for joining us on our little adventure. This episode was written, reported, and produced by Isabel Khaleesi and Zach Arabko. Our intro music was provided by Goran Andrik, and the audio clip by Digital Smoke Studios. The outro music was provided by Theo JT. All sounds were licensed through freesound.org. I'm Isabel Khaleesi.
And I'm Zach Arabko.
And we'll see you again in our next episode, where we'll discuss the origin and potential legalization of LSD.
Everything is changing to digital. Everything is online. People aren't just waiting for the 6 o'clock news anymore. People want their news right now. They want to be able to go onto their smartphone, onto the internet, and see the news that they want to see.
Vancouver is growing at, a really rapid rate, the Lower Mainland even, and with the tools that we're given here, we're able to cover all of that.
Welcome to BCIT Magazine. I'm Radhika Sikka-King.
In the program, they really leave it up to you. I mean, the help is there when you need it, figuring out how to use the programs like Premiere, Audition, and figuring out how to use the cameras. But it's up to you to sort of experiment and figure out what you can do when you go out in the field.
They brought candles and flowers to remember the student who lost her life yesterday.
Theresa May says the international community condemns Moscow.
They really make sure that you know the basics and you are able to put out a quality product.
I'm Brady Tretanero.
And I'm Radhika Sikka-King. Thank you for tuning in to BCIT Magazine.